ad-lib thoughts. I want to hear from you on these thoughts concerning HEX and the effective interest rate given to stakers. The true inflation rate of HEX is programmed in at 3.69%. That number does not sound to me extremely high, but it is, of course, 3.69% of total HEX. HEX on the market, effective HEX on the market actually being bought and sold and held by, for example, non-OA address is quite a bit less than the OA. Essentially, the OA address holds a relatively large percentage of the total HEX. So when this 3.69% that is given to stakers is given to stakers, the actual HEX being bought and sold in the market, or able to be bought and sold in the market, has an effective inflation rate much higher, I would argue. For example, if, roughly speaking, if the inflation rate of HEX, total HEX, is 3.69%, and say 10% of stakers, 10% of total HEX is staked, roughly 36.9% average interest for that staking, inflation and interest, is going to those stakers. If you took out from the picture all of the non-staked HEX and just looked at that staked HEX, which is staked, it's locked up for anything from 1 day to 15 years to 555, 5555. Just looking at that, which is a big gist and it's not necessarily an accurate picture, but just looking at that, for price to stay the same, for the HEX price to stay 50 cents, or I don't want to say a lower number, but 10 cents, whatever price it is, for the price to stay the same, roughly speaking, give it enough time, the needed buy pressure would have to be 36.9% roughly greater for the price to stay the same. If for that HEX to, eventually that inflation is going to come back to the market, I'm assuming, and it will need to be bought. In the staked HEX that's coming back with now that new HEX, the 36.9% more HEX is coming back at the end of those stakes. For the price to stay the same, that has to be bought at 36.9% more. Like, there has to be 36.9% more money there, roughly, for the price to even stay the same. And I think people intuitively look at these advertisements for HEX where HEX is being advertised at an average of 36.9 or whatever interest rate for staking your HEX. And they're like, that has to be a scam because it's too high. I'm very much not trying to say that HEX is a scam. I don't currently think HEX is a scam. Of course, people define scam different ways and all this stuff. I don't think HEX is a scam. But I do think that people, that alone is one of the many things with HEX that people get triggered by, and they're like, well, 40% interest is higher than anything responsible. So that means that by correlation or something like that, this cannot be responsible. And I would say that there might be some truth in that intuitive feeling of this might be dangerous. But I wouldn't say it's because it's a scam. I would just say this is my question to the community that I would love to hear back from my favorite thing is hearing from the most intelligent people possible. Simply put, intelligent people tend to make complex things simple, I think. And that's one of my, I would love to hear back from other people in the community, simply why this such a high interest rate, effective inflation given to the stakers is sustainable long term. I'm not trying to say that even right now this is a bad thing, but I'm wondering if it's the best thing for HEX. I'm not saying that it's going to ruin HEX. I'm not saying that it's horrible, but I am wondering if it's the best thing. And another thought I have along the same line is we have this other store of value coin. I consider HEX a store of value coin. I don't think that's surprising. Our good old friend Bitcoin has inflation, and it's very well known happening where the inflation rate of Bitcoin is cut roughly every 4 years, and that happening, the cutting of the inflation rate, appears to be associated with a price increase. And I think that the happening for Bitcoin has been a positive thing for Bitcoin. Overall, Bitcoin has benefited by that potential sell pressure from miners being cut in half. And I'm wondering if there's a worthy takeaway for HEX, that possibly lowering of the interest rate of the inflation given to stakers would be beneficial. And so the question is, of course, HEX code is written, it is what it is. And the HEX code is written, it is what it is. But we have seen things in the past where, for example, the big old origin address, the OA address, has staked in the past at the end of the adoption amplifier, and I think it was, in my opinion, for the benefit of HEX. It ended up, I think, benefiting the people that really believed in HEX, that were showing by their actions that they believed in it long term and staking long term. Some of the actions that the OA address did helped those people. And I'm wondering, would it be a good idea for the OA address to stake, taking some of the inflation rate off of the market, assuming the OA address isn't going to sell, and that the staked OA address, the inflation that would then be paid to the OA address, stays off the market. In a sense, it would be effectively lowering the inflation rate overall, even though, of course, it would still be 3.69. It'd just be going to the OA address, which doesn't sell, so it's off the market. So effectively, it's changing the potential sell pressure in a similar way, I would argue, to what I was trying to explain with Bitcoin and the inflation that was paid to the miners that happens every 4 or so years. So my question is, what do you think about this? Do you have a ton of HEX staked, or are you a whale or a shark or a dolphin or something like that? And in HEX, would you feel hurt by the OA address if it was to stake and lower your effective interest rate? What do you think about this? So I have some other simple thoughts, hopefully, on this also. And one of them is that it just has to do with people in general and the way that people tend to think, and how certain things come more intuitively to some people than others. And I think, for example, compounding interest in the way that the HEX code is written to mimic compound interest, where staking today will always give you more T shares than staking the same thing tomorrow. And the amount that will benefit you long term is something I think is a little bit harder for the average person to pay attention to than, for example, the price of HEX going up. And I think the HEX price, the price per HEX going up over time is very important and needed for HEX adoption. And I think even though the interest rate to the stakers is a beautiful thing and needed and good and all this stuff, I'm wondering if the price would the price of HEX go higher? Is that a accurate assumption on my part if the interest rate given to stakers was to go down? I'm not saying how much to go down. I'm not saying when this should happen either, which I would love to hear back on. People have ideas of when that would be a good time and how much, and if this whole idea is just garbage to start with. Is there a lesson to learn from Bitcoin to apply to HEX? Would this in fact benefit HEX? I'm not saying that HEX would be necessarily ruined if this doesn't happen, but would the OA address staking benefit HEX? I would like to hear what you think about this. Hopefully I've presented this relatively simply. If there's a major point that I should explain better, I'd love to hear back on that as well. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think about this?